Bonjour les amis Brown. I'm sitting in one of my favorite places to read, which is outside, because we're going to do some reading. This is John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. It's a great story. It was written in 1937 during the Great Depression, at a time of great economic upheaval in North America and indeed the world. And that's what we're experiencing right now, or one of the things we're experiencing right now. I can see Rowan and our dogs and Madame who are playing in the yard, and at some point I can guarantee you Joanna's going to interrupt us. But let's get started. Of Mice and Men, Chapter 1. Sorry, before we go, you can find this book. Is it backwards for you guys? Probably. You can find this book online in any bookstore if you want. The reason why I think it's cool that you guys listen to me read it is because we always stop, just like we do in class, stop and I'll make like comments and stuff that hopefully will like enlighten or enrich some things for you guys, as you know, as we would normally do in school. Coffee, by the way. So here we go. Of Mice and Men, Chapter 1. And we're going to discuss this on Friday, live at 1 o'clock, I think, during Roey's nap. Of Mice and Men. A few miles south of Soledad, the Salinas River drops into the close to the hillside bank and runs deep and green. The water is warm too, for it has slipped twinkling over yellow sands in the sunlight before reaching the narrow pool. On one side of the river, the golden foothills slope and curve up to the strong and rocky Gavilan Mountains. But on the valley side, the water is lined with trees. Willows, fresh and green with every spring, carrying in their lower leaf junctures debris of the winter's flooding. Sycamores with mottled white, recumbent limbs and branches that arch over the pool. On the sandy bank under the trees, the leaves lie deep and so crisp that a lizard makes a great skittering if it runs among them. Rabbits come out of the bush and sit on the sand in the evening, and the damp flats are covered with the night tracks of coons and with the spread pads of dogs from the ranches, as well as the split wedge tracks of deer that come to drink in the dark. There is a path through the willows, and among the sycamores a path beaten down hard by boys coming down from the ranches to swim in the deep pool, and beaten hard by vagabonds who come wearily down from the highway in the evening to jungle up near water. In front of the low horizontal limb of a giant sycamore, there is an ash pile made by many fires. The limb is worn smooth by the men who've sat on it. Evening on a hot day started, and a little wind moved among the leaves. The shade climbed up the hills toward the top. On the sandbanks, the rabbits sat quietly as little gray sculptured stones. And then, from the direction of the state highway, came the sound of footsteps on the crisp sycamore leaves. The rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. A stilted heron labored up into the air and pounded down the river. For a moment, the place was lifeless. And then, two men emerged from the path and came into the opening by the green pool. They had walked in single file down the path, and even in the open, one of them stayed behind the other. Both were dressed in denim trousers and in denim coats with brass buttons. Both wore black, shapeless hats, and both carried tight blanket rolls slung over their shoulders. The first man was small and quick and dark of face, with restless eyes, sharp, strong features. Every part of him was defined: small, strong hands, slender arms, a thin and bony nose. Behind him walked his opposite, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large, pale eyes. With wide, sloping shoulders, he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. His arms did not swing at his sides, but hung loosely. The first man stopped short of the clearing and the follower nearly ran over him. He took off his hat and wiped the sweatband with the forefinger and snapped the moisture off. His huge companion dropped his blankets and flung himself down and drank from the surface of the green pool. He drank with long gulps, snorting water like a horse. The small man stepped nervously behind him. "Lenny," he said sharply. "Lenny, for God's sakes, don't drink so much." Lenny continued to snort into the pool. The small man leaned over and shook him on the shoulder. "Lenny, you gotta be sick. You're gonna be sick again like you were last night." Sorry, Molly's coming to join us here. And Lou. So if you see me, like, anyway. "Lenny, you're gonna get sick like you was last night." Lenny dipped his whole head under, hat and all, and then sat up, sat up as water dripped off his blue coat and ran down his back. "That's good," he said. "You drink some, George. You take a good big drink." He smiled happily. George unslung his bindle and dropped it gently into the bank. "I ain't even sure it's good water," he said. "It looks kind of scummy." Lenny dabbled his big paw in the water and wiggled with his fingers so that the water rose into little splashes and rings widened across the pool on the other side and came back again. Lenny watched them go. "Look, George, look what I done." George knelt beside the pool and drank with his hands in quick scoops. "It tastes all right," I admitted. "Don't really seem to be running, though. You ain't supposed to be drinking water, ain't running." He said hopelessly. "You'd drink out of a gutter if you was that thirsty." He threw a scoop of water into his face, rubbed it about his hand under his chin, around the back of his neck, and then he replaced his hat, pushed himself back onto the river, and drew up his knees and embraced them. Lenny, who had been watching, imitated George exactly. He pushed himself back, drew his knees up, embraced them, and looked over at George to see if he had done it just right. He pulled his hat down a little more over his eyes the way George's hat was. George stared morosely into the water. What do you guys think morosely means? What would tell you about the way George is behaving? Let's see if it tells us here. The rims of his eyes were red with sun glare, and he said angrily, "We could just as well have rode clear of that ranch, and that bastard bus driver knew what he was talking about. Jeez, little stretch down the highway," he says. "Jeez, little stretch. Damn near 4 miles, that's what we've been walking." Didn't want to stop at the ranch gate, that's what. Too goddamn lazy to pull up. Wonder he isn't too damn stupid. He's probably had sold that already by now. Kicks us out and says, "Just a little bit down the road." Huh, I bet it was more than 4 miles on this hot day. Lenny looked timidly over at him. "George?" "Yeah, what do you want?" "Where are we going, George?" The little man jerked down the brim of his hat and scowled at Lenny. "So you forgot already? Did you? I gotta tell you again, don't I?" Hang on, another visitor. My neighbor's cat. "You forgot already where we're going?" "Jesus, you crazy bastard, Lenny." George. "I forgot," Lenny said softly. "Sorry. Yeah, I forgot," Lenny said softly. "I tried not to forget. Honestly, I do, God. Honestly, I do, George." Okay, I'll tell you again. I ain't got nothing to do. Might just as well spend my time telling you things over and over again. I tried, said Lenny. "But it didn't do so good. I remember about the rabbits, George." "The hell with them rabbits. That's all you can ever remember and talk about is them rabbits. Okay, now you listen. And you listen good. Remember, so we don't get into no trouble. You remember sitting in the gutter on Howard Street and watching that blackboard?" Lenny's face broke into a delighted smile. "Well, sure, George, I remember that. But what do we do then? I remember some girls come by and you say, to hell with what I say. You remember us going into Murray and Reddy's and they give us work cards and bus tickets. Remember that?" "Oh, sure, George, I remember that now." His hands went quickly into his side coat pockets. He said it gently. "George, I ain't got mine. I must have lost it." He looked down around on the ground in despair. "You never had none, you crazy bastard. I got both of them right here. Bus ticket, work card." "Think I'd let you carry your own work card?" Lenny grinned with relief. "I thought. Bonjour, ma petite."
Bonjour.
Ça va bien? Que fais-tu là? Roey's just gonna say a little hi. Roey, veux-tu dire bonjour à la classe?
Hello.
There we go. So, George and Lenny, what do we know about them so far? We'll talk about that on Friday, but George knows that he can't leave work tickets or bus tickets and work, and we're talking about that, work permits with this guy George. So he's got all their stuff, the important stuff. The hell with what I says. You remember us going to Murray and Reddy's and they give us work cards and bus tickets? Oh sure, George, I remember that now. His hands went quickly into his side coat pockets. He said gently, "George, I ain't got mine. I must have lost it." He looked down at the ground in despair. "You never had none, you crazy. I got both of them here. Think I'd let you carry your own work card?" Lenny grinned with relief. I thought I put it in my side pocket. His hand went to it again. George looked sharply at him. What'd you take out of that pocket? Ain't nothing in my pocket, Lenny said cleverly. I know there ain't. You got it in your hand. What you got in your hand, hiding it? It ain't nothing, George, honest. Give it here. Lenny held his closed hand away from George. It's only a mouse, George. A mouse? A live mouse? Lenny? It's a dead mouse, George. I didn't kill it, honest. I found it. It was dead. Give it here, George. Oh, let me have it. Let me have it. Give it here. Sorry, it should have been give me here, Lenny. Lenny closed his hand slowly and obeyed. George took the mouse and threw it across the pool to the other side, among the brush. What do you want with a dead mouse for, anyway? I could pet it with my thumb while we walked along, said Lenny. Well, you ain't petting no mice while you walk with me. You remember where we're going now? Lenny looked startled, and then, in embarrassment, his face went up to his knees again. I forgot. Dang. Geez, George said resignedly. Well, look, we're gonna work on a ranch like the one we come up from up north. Up north? Yeah, when we was up in Weed. Oh, sure, I remember. In Weed. That ranch we're going to right down there is about a quarter mile. We're gonna go and see about a boss. Now, look, I'll give him the work tickets, but you ain't gonna say a word, Lenny. Not a word, you understand? You just stand there and say nothing. If he finds out what a crazy bastard you are, we won't get no job. But if he sees your work, he'll hire you before we talk. You got it? Sure, George. I get it. Okay. So now when we go and see the boss, what are you gonna do? Lenny thought. His face grew tight. I ain't gonna say nothing. Just gonna stand there. That's my boy. That's swell. You say that over 2 or 3 more times so you don't forget now. Lenny droned it softly to himself. I ain't gonna say nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing. Okay, said George. And you ain't gonna do bad things. Not like you done in Weed, neither. Lenny looked puzzled. Like I done in Weed? You forget that too? Well, I ain't gonna remind you. Fear you do it again. A light of understanding broke across Lenny's face. They run us out of Weed, he exploded triumphantly. Run us out, hell. We run. They was looking for us. But they didn't catch us. Lenny giggled happily. I didn't forget about that, you bet. George lay back on the sand and crossed his hands under his head, and Lenny imitated him, raising his head to see whether he was doing it right. God, you're a lot of trouble, said George. I can get along so easy and so nice if I didn't have you on my tail. Might have even had a girl by now. For a moment, Lenny lay quiet, and then he said hopefully, We're gonna work on the ranch, George? Yep, you got that, but we're gonna sleep here tonight, because I got a reason. The day was going fast now. Only the tops of the Gabilan Mountains flamed with the light in the sun that had gone from the valley. A water snake slipped along the pool, and its head held up like a little periscope. Mr. Bowlby, by the way, is the only person I've ever seen bitten by a water snake. Got him right on the calf. True story. It scared me a lot now, water snakes. Lou! Gotta call my dog. Come here. Come. Good boy. Bravo. A water snake slipped along the pool and its head held up like a little periscope. The reeds jerked slightly in the current. Far off toward the highway, a man shouted something, and another man shouted back. The sycamore limbs rustled, under a little wind that died immediately. George, why ain't we going to the ranch and getting some supper? They got supper at the ranch. George rolled on his side. No reason at all for you. I like it here. Tomorrow we're gonna go work. I seen thrashing machines on the way down. That means we'll be bagging grain and busting a gut. Tonight, I'm gonna lay right here and look up. I like it. Then he got up on his knees and he looked down at George. Ain't we gonna have no supper? Sure we are. If you gather up some of those dead willow sticks, I got 3 cans of beans here in my bindle. You get a fire ready. I'll give you a match when you get the sticks together. Then we'll heat the beans and have a supper. Lenny said, I like beans with ketchup. Well, we ain't got no ketchup, Lenny. Now you go get the wood and don't you fool around. It'll be dark before long. Lenny lumbered to his feet and disappeared into the bush. George lay where he was and whistled softly to himself. There were little sounds of splashing down the river in the direction that Lenny had taken. George stopped, whistled, and listened. Poor bastard, he said softly. And then he went on whistling again. In a moment, Lenny came crashing back through the brush. He carried one small willow stick in his hand, and George sat up. "All right, give me that mouse." But Lenny made an elaborate pantomime of innocence. "What mouse, George? I ain't got no mouse." George held out his hand. "Come on, give it to me. You ain't putting nothing over." Lenny hesitated, backed away, looked wildly at the brush line, as though he was contemplating running away for his freedom, and George said coldly, "You want to give me that mouse, or do I have to sock you?" "Give you what, George?" "You know damn well what. I want that mouse." Lenny reluctantly reached into his pocket. His voice broke a little. "I don't know why I can't keep it. It ain't nobody's mouse. I didn't steal it. I found it, lying there beside the road." George's hand remained outstretched imperiously. Slowly like a terrier who didn't want to bring a ball to its master. Lenny approached, drew back, approached again. George snapped his fingers sharply, and at that sound, Lenny laid the mouse in his hand. What literary device we got here, guys? George's hand remained outstretched imperiously. Slowly like a terrier who doesn't want to bring a ball to its master, Lenny approached. It's a simile, right? Because we use like. "I wasn't going to do nothing bad with it, George. I was just stroking it." George stood up and threw the mouse as far as he could this time into the darkening bush, and then stepped to the pool to wash his hands. "You crazy fool. Don't you think I could have seen that your feet was wet and that you went across the river to get it?" He heard Lenny's whimper cry and wheeled about. "Blubbering like a baby. Jeez. Big guy like you?" Lenny's lip quivered and tears started in his eyes. "Oh, Lenny." George put a hand on Lenny's massive shoulder. "I ain't taking it away. It's just... I'm not taking it for meanness. It's just that the mouse ain't fresh, Lenny. You can't be carrying a dead mouse around. We'll get you another mouse that's fresh, and then you can pet him all you want." Lenny sat down on the ground and hung his head dejectedly. "I don't know where there is no other mouse. I remember a lady used to give him to me. Every one she got. But that lady ain't here no more." George scoffed. "Lady, huh? Don't even remember who the lady was. That was your own Aunt Clara. And she stopped giving them to you because you always killed them. Them big hands of yours." Lenny looked sadly up at him. "But they were so little," he said apologetically. "I'd pet him, and pretty soon my fingers would pinch the little heads. And then they were dead because they were so little." "I wish we'd get the rabbits soon, George. They ain't so little." "The hell with them rabbits. Pretty soon, George?" "Sorry, the hell with them rabbits. And you can't be trusted with no live mice neither. Your Aunt Clara gave you a rubber mouse so you wouldn't kill it." "It wasn't so good as a pet," said Lenny. The flame of the sunset lifted from the mountaintops, and dusk came into the valley, and a half-darkness came into the willows and the sycamores. A big carp rose from the surface of the pool, gulped air, and then sank mysteriously back down into the water again, leaving the widening rings of the water. Overhead, the leaves whisked again, and little pools of willows and cottons blew down and landed on the pool surface. "You gonna get that wood?" George demanded. "There's plenty of wood right up there against the back of them sycamores. Floodwater wood. Now you get it." The wood that like washes up on and dries up on the shore is always really dry, eh? When it like that, what's the word for that? Can't think of it right now. Isn't that weird? But it's always really dry. Great for fire. Driftwood. Why did it take that long? "Go get that wood." Lenny went behind the tree and brought out a litter of dried leaves and twigs. He threw them into a heap on the old ash pile and went back for more, and then more. It was almost night now. A dove's wings whistled over the water. A dove's wings whistled over the water. Alliteration, right? The W, the wah, wah, wah. It's another literary device. The flame cracked up among the twigs and fell to work. George undid his bindle and brought out 3 cans of beans. He stood them about the fire, close against the blaze, but not quite touching the flame. "There's enough beans for 4 men here," George said. Lenny watched him over the fire. He said patiently, "I like 'em with ketchup." "Well, we ain't got any, George." "Whatever we ain't got, that's always what you want. God almighty. If I was alone, I could live so easy. I could get a job and work and no trouble, no mess at all. And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50 and go to town and get whatever I want. Why, I could stay in a cat house all night if I wanted. I could eat at any place, any hotel, or anything I want. And all I could do whatever way I want, a whole month. Get a gallon of whiskey, go to a pool room, shoot pool. Damn, I wish I could shoot some pool. Be cool to look up what $50 is worth in 1937. We'll talk about that on Friday. So yeah, it looks like they work for like $50 a month. Lenny knelt and looked over the fire at the angry face of George, and Lenny's face was drawn with terror. And what I got, George? You're all I got. I got you. I can't keep a job, and you and you lose me. You lose me every job I get. It just keeps shoving all over the country all the time. And that ain't the worst. You get yourself into trouble, Lenny. You do bad things, and then we have to go. His voice rose nearly to a shout. You're crazy, you understand me? You crazy. You keep me in hot water all this time. Damn. Damn, Lenny. I just wanted to touch the edge of the dress, said George. Well, how the hell she know that's just what you wanted to do? She jerks back and you hold on like it was a little mouse. You can't do that, Lenny. You can't be touching people. She yells and then we gotta go hide in an irrigation ditch all night while they come out and search for us. Damn, George. All the time like that, all the time. I wish I could put you in a cage with 1,000,000 mice so you could have your fun. His anger left him suddenly, and he looked across the fire at Lenny's anguished face, and then he looked ashamedly into the flames. So we find out why they're on the run. So it looks like George had wanted to touch like a woman's dress. First of all, what can we tell about George and Lenny, and about George in particular? George is huge, but he's also slow intellectually. So he's got this fascination with soft things, mice in particular, and he's huge. And just when he basically he loves these mice, but when he pets them, he ends up always killing them. So it sounds like in their old town where they were working, this town of Weed, I can speak of his name. It's a real town, I looked it up. He had touched a woman's dress and wanted to rub the fabric because it was smooth. And of course, what does she think? Here's this huge guy grabbing her dress, and all you know what breaks loose. So that's why they're on the run, and they spent the night in an irrigation ditch, hiding from the law, we'll call it. And now they've made their way down they're going to see if they can get work on another ranch. And George, of course, just wants Lenny, if they see him work, they know he's going to be a good worker, great. He doesn't want Lenny to say anything because Lenny talks himself into trouble and does things he shouldn't be doing. George's anger left him suddenly, and he looked across the fire at Lenny's anguished face, and then he looked ashamedly at the flames. It was quite dark now, but the fire lit the trunk of the trees and the curving branches overhead. Lenny crawled slowly and cautiously around the fire until he was close to George. He sat back on his heels. George took the beans cans so that the other side faced the fire, and he pretended to be unaware of Lenny so close beside him. George, what do you want, Lenny? I was only fooling, George. I don't want no ketchup. I wouldn't eat no ketchup. I wouldn't eat it if it was right here beside me. If it was here, you would have some. But I wouldn't eat none, George. I'd leave it all for you. You could cover your beans with it, and I wouldn't touch none of it. George still stared back morosely into the fire. When I think of the swell time I could have without you, I go nuts. I never get no peace. Lenny still knelt, and he looked off into the darkness across the river. George, you want I should go away and leave you alone? Where the hell could you go, Lenny?